Welcome to the Classical Philosophy Podcast. With me again is Chris. And today we are going to discuss Leo Tolstoy's book, What is Art? Which is decisively not an aesthetic theory. He's actually very much opposed to aesthetics, and we'll probably get into that too. And he has a very specific idea of what art is supposed to do. It's not supposed to create something beautiful or something of truth, but to strive for the good and to, to create communities. So, what is Leo Tolstoy's book? What do you think is the main trajectory of the book?
Well, he has a very specific idea of what art is that goes against the current of the time. So he wrote this in 1898, but at some point he says he's been working on these ideas for like 30 years. So this is not like a reactionary like a throwaway. Just he's just fed up with the art of his time. He's really been thinking about these ideas for a long time, and I think there's a nice quote somewhere where he just says what art is. He says, "Art is a human activity, the aim of which is to convey to others the loftiest and best feelings people have attained to in life." Mm-hmm. So he really has this. I mean, it's a religious a theory of art, if you want. I mean, you said it's not a theory, and that's right. It's not a theory in the way that other aesthetic theories like Baumgarten and Shaftesbury, Hutcheson, Burke, the people that he writes about.
Kant, Hegel, Schelling, yeah.
Yeah, it's nothing like the Third Critique, if you've read Kant, but if it's not a theory, it's an idea, and it is this religious idea. The aim of which is to convey to others the loftiest and best feelings people have attained to in life. So that's what Tolstoy is saying art is.
Yes. And the book begins interestingly where he talks about the art world as it was back then, and it doesn't seem to be very different from what it is now. It's that, in every newspaper there will be a section on theater and music. There will be some description of some exhibition that's in the first paragraph where he's talking about this, something about paintings, etc., etc. And what he's then saying somewhere right in the beginning is that people who give their lives to the art world are very often so destroyed they cannot do anything else. And he talks about being backstage and finding it a rather odd and very awkward situation, actually, when he experiences what the people are like in theater, and so he doesn't think that is art, what we usually consider, because what that to him is, because what aesthetic theory has done, and he's lashing out against the Germans and even more so against the French, isn't he? Yeah. That I'm quoting here, that he's saying that it's reducing art maybe even to beauty, aesthetic standards, leads to it becoming egoistic pleasure, and there's a certain immorality in existing art. And he says somewhere else that it's just very idle, and people who it's just for enjoyment. So what?
Yeah, so there's a definite class-based critique here we need to talk about. He's really railing against the idea that art is something for the upper classes to while away some time as they lounge about on a couch. That's really what he doesn't like, and he thinks a lot of art is really for this purpose.
Yeah, and art became not the important thing it was intended to be, but the empty amusement of idle people. So what it was supposed to be is that it creates communities, and it's actually striving towards the good, which is ultimately the Christian God. But it's very interesting, I think, that he says that aesthetic theory, which begins with Baumgarten, who comes up with the word in the German, and that subsequently German idealists like Kant, Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel and the French, whom he despises even more, are actually responsible for having brought about art, a theory of art that is too focused on.
Yeah, that's right. He says that all those definitions that you were talking about in the 18th and 19th centuries, they either say that beauty is something existing in itself, or that beauty is a disinterested feeling of pleasure. So I mean, you could call those like the metaphysical definition, where you say that beauty is this thing that exists, or you could talk about a subjective definition, where it's a feeling. And he thinks both of those have got it wrong, basically, when we're trying to talk about what art does specifically, which is the way you define something. You want to say what are its necessary and sufficient conditions. You don't want to say that the idea of art is exhausted by pleasure, whether that's, as I say, a metaphysical idea that pleasure is something existing in the world, or that it's this feeling people have. I mean, art has to be more than that. It's a thicker concept than this idle pleasure.
So what does he mean by feelings then? Because they're not subjective feelings, are they?
Yeah, I'd say they are, aren't they? How are they not subjective?
Yeah, because look, if that's just subjective, then what he's talking about is just a very strange kind of, I have my feelings, and then they have to be universalizable, at least feelings of appreciation of the existence of God and God's goodness.
Yeah, I mean, Kant talks about this as in the third critique by saying that we both are, when we consider something beautiful, we understand that it's just us saying it, but there is also a universalizing concept going on there, so that we say that all people should consider this as beautiful as I do. So you're right in that there's both, in that it reaches beyond the subjective, but I think the way that Tolstoy is writing about this is, as I was saying, this class-based critique of someone relaxing on a couch being played Chopin or something, and just enjoying the feeling. And you also said in your introduction that this is very much a modern thing. I mean, things haven't changed a lot. This is a very good book to read nowadays as well, because I think art is, for a lot of people, this utilitarian experience, right? Especially music, I think, more than anything else, right? We don't often just sit and listen to a piece of music to appreciate it, do we? We drive to music, we cook to music, we do errands and
it's
about town to music. So and we do it because it makes us feel good. It makes us feel maybe like we're controlling our environment. And there are all these playlists, aren't there, right, on Spotify and Tidal, where suited to a mood. So as if music is something that you basically decide what mood you're in, and then
but then how do you distinguish those feelings from the feelings that Tolstoy talks about, right? There must be a difference.
Well, do you mean the positive vision of art Tolstoy has?
Yeah.
Well, yes, right, I see what you mean now. Yeah. So art is the activity, the aim of which is to convey to others the loftiest and best feelings.
Yeah,
so
because if you stop, yeah.
So the difference there is that Tolstoy is talking about feelings that are quite different. So Tolstoy's talking about feelings of nobility, goodness, whereas the aestheticians are talking about feelings of pleasure. So there's the difference, is between pleasure and goodness. So both are feelings, but they're very different feelings.
Yes, but for example, if he's all about reaching God, then I don't understand why he's so radically opposed, for example, to Hegel. Tolstoy himself says that, for Hegel, God manifests himself in nature and art in the form of beauty. God expresses himself in two ways, in the object and in the subject, in nature and in spirit. Beauty is the idea shining through matter. Now, the Hegelian aesthetics is very much um, in favor of pursuing or finding the good in art, um, and expressing sort of God's goodness or power in art, because it sort of imitates um, God's power, if you like. That was not very well put, but it's very strange that that Tolstoy is against that. And I don't know, does he give? Do you think does he give good enough of an explanation for what kind of feelings he talks about?
Well, I mean, I don't know as much about Hegel as you do, but I think what he'd say there would be something like the Hegelian idea is it's too metaphysical, right? It's too abstract, it's too conceptual. And this
Mm-hmm.
goes back a bit to what we were talking about Nietzsche last time. Um, he wants us to look upwards, but he's very much a person of the earth, right? Um, any happiness has to be a human happiness. Any truth has to be a human truth. It can't be something abstract and thinned out. And that might be what he'd say to the Hegel idea. I mean, Hegel talks about Geist, doesn't he? Which
Yeah.
is spirit or God, but that's a very different God to Tolstoy's.
Mm-hmm.
I think Tolstoy, and this goes back to his repeated assertions that this has to be that art is a simple activity. I mean, simplicity. He's always striving for simplicity in art, and that means, as he says right at the end, which is his sort of final manifesto. The artist of the future will understand that to invent a little tale, a touching song, a ditty, an amusing riddle, a funny joke, to make a drawing that will give joy to dozens of generations or to millions of children and adults is incomparably more important and fruitful than to write a novel or a symphony or paint a picture that will for a short time divert a few members of the wealthy classes and then be forgotten forever. So there's something, this is a very simple idea, and I think the Hegelian is too abstract, too conceptual for Tolstoy.
Yes. Okay. Now I understand it. So it's about building communities as well, though, right?
Yeah.
This is what good art does. So it's not abstract. It's not entertainment. It's not, because that's vacuous, empty, nihilistic almost, and it destroys people. It's just it's a grotesque display of a waste of human creativity almost. And what he wants is, you could think of it that maybe then, the church is an artwork, or the Greek temple is an artwork, because they form the center of a community.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, he has a lot of bad things to say about the established church,
Yeah.
and Catholicism in general. So I think he'd be wary of aestheticizing religion the way that Catholicism in particular does. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the community aspect, you're definitely right that that a simple build, simple church. I mean, he doesn't talk a lot about architecture. He's normally he's talking about stories and music mainly.
Right.
But yeah, I think there's something right there.
So what's to Tolstoy good art? What's a good artwork? What are his
Yeah,
examples?
that's as I said. I might have said last time. There's similar to Nietzsche in this, in that 95% of this essay is anti. He's saying what he doesn't like. It's similar to the way Nietzsche does, and you kind of have to work quite hard to find out what he does like, and kind of read negatively in that way. But as I said that quote at the end. A little tale, a touching song, a ditty, an amusing riddle, a funny joke, a drawing that will give joy to dozens of generations or to millions of children and adults. So it's these very simple stories. It's difficult to almost folk tales, really. I mean, folk art is going to be something that
Yeah.
you think he would be kind of the paradigmatic
So
artwork of Tolstoy.
so he gives examples of what he absolutely despises. Those are, am I right? It's Shakespeare,
It's
and
pretty much
Wagner.
everyone, to be honest.
Yeah, but Richard Wagner as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, he does. I think he might like. The thing about Shakespeare is, and I think this is. I feel bad because I mean I want to agree with him on some points, but obviously I don't agree with him on Shakespeare.
Yeah.
The the thing I think about Shakespeare is that it's inventive,
Mm.
and what art must never be for Tolstoy is inventive, right? It has to be this. The artist receives. Well, it's the expression of these religious feelings, right? Isn't it? The artist for Tolstoy is someone who writes under the pressure or under the experience of religious feeling,
Yeah.
of this brotherhood of man kind of feeling. And Shakespeare, I mean, one of the reasons he doesn't like Shakespeare is that he's using Shakespeare is more of a craftsman than this kind of than this artist writing under the inspiration of religious feeling. All the stories that Shakespeare uses are already there, so he's using his. I don't think um, Tolstoy would deny that he's very effective at this, but he uses his skills to create these plays out of works that already exist. So he's really using his faculties in this way. And as is well known, Shakespeare wasn't afraid of making money out of his work. And he was quite successful in being as lucrative as possible, which is something we often forget when we just talk about the genius of Shakespeare.
It's I would be interested to know, but we both don't, I guess, what art means in Russian, what the word for art is.
Yeah,
because it might have a very different meaning in Russian, but that's so maybe something we have to research after this conversation. But because it's, I mean, almost nothing is art for him, right? Like anything we would consider art is not art. It's only art if it teaches a consciousness of community.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about Shakespeare, but I think if we really want to understand who Tolstoy is against, we need to talk about French poetry because this is really it for him. I mean, doesn't get any worse than Mallarmé, Verlaine, Rimbaud,
Baudelaire.
Yeah, and the reason for that is the riddle, right? All these poets are riddlers, and they think that and their aesthetic theories really tell us that the riddle is, which is funny because he says, well, it tells an amusing riddle is something that Tolstoy likes. That the way that the French poets write is that this is a puzzle to be deciphered. So I mean, I can just read some. He quotes a lot of it. Let me just quote some here. Hushed. Who's this? I don't know. I'll find that. Hushed to the whelming low, cloud of basalt and lava, even to the slavish echoes, by a trumpet without virtue. What sepulchral shipwreck? You know it, foam, but Slava there, supreme one among the wrecks, abolishes the divested mast, or that which furious for lack of some most high perdition, the whole vain abyss deplored, in the so white hair that trails, will greedily have drowned the siren's infant flank. So I think that's Verlaine.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I mean, that will give you an idea of what he doesn't like.
Yes. So and Wagner for him is just spectacle, right? That's upper class or bourgeois spectacle for pure entertainment, and that's very, because that was actually Nietzsche's criticism of Wagner when they had their falling out, is that there was this hope in the 19th century with Wagner and others that there would be, as a response to the kind of the desolate age, there would be a religion of art.
Yeah.
This would counter nihilism. And then Nietzsche saw what was going on in Bayreuth, and it was just spectacle, entertainment, vacuous and empty, and it did not inspire a very new movement or did not create new gods.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, part of the reason Nietzsche didn't like Wagner was this, when as you say at Bayreuth, this celebrity of Wagner, right? It was Bayreuth was this church to Wagner that was really everything Nietzsche hated, this kind of hero worship, and but also, and maybe ironically, the thing that Nietzsche hated about the latter Wagner and operas like Parsifal was his Christianity. Um, the Parsifal is a very Christian work. It's a very ascetic work as well, which at the time Nietzsche's hating of Wagner owes as much to Nietzsche changing as it does to Wagner changing, right?
Yeah, I'm gonna just mention Heidegger briefly. Is that in Heidegger's essay on the origin of the artwork, Ursprung des Kunstwerks, Heidegger also says that art is not subjective. If we think of art as having to do anything with the beautiful in the aesthetic sense, then we reduce art to really just subjectivistic, like taste, basically, and that spirit is also too abstract. But we don't have to get into what he has to say, what the artwork really is in terms of earth and world. That's for another talk, maybe at some point. But what he does say, in that, is very similar to Tolstoy, in that, for example, the Greek temple spans open a world. So the world is the temple, and the temple uh, is where is sort of the center of it. It forms a community. It gives a place, a dwelling ground to a people. And that would be also for a church, for example. That would be the case for that. Or you could think of other. It's probably in terms of architecture, but he also says that about Hölderlin's Rhine, for example. That's something that helps a people to understand who they are, and therefore it forms a community. That's what the artwork does. It provides a dwelling ground. So maybe there's at least that kind of a, shall we say, similarity between the two, that if art is just aesthetics or about the beautiful, then it basically, however convoluted and fanciful you formulate your theory, like Hegel and Schelling, as Tolstoy says, it's basically all just vacuous, and it all just leads to vacuous entertainment.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. And there's something in the kind of in the simplicity of what you were saying about Heidegger, that I think, yeah, Tolstoy would recognize, as this idea of what Tolstoy's expression is probably more of a, the way you're talking about Heidegger there, art sounds more like a functional concept, right? Something that facilitates the coming together of people. Tolstoy would probably say it's more of an expression, as he says, of the loftiest and best feelings people have attained to in life. But I think there's definitely some similarities there.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
Well, he has a. Maybe we can talk a bit about Tolstoy. If Tolstoy does have a theory of art,
okay, I'll ask you. I cut that and then I ask.
Okay.
So, do you think that there's a theory of art for Tolstoy?
So, insofar as, Tolstoy has this kind of historical explanation of art, in which, one of the quotes is that he says that the critical norm by which all art in a society is valued. So this is a sort of theory of criticism, if not so much of art. But the critical norm by which all art in a society is valued is the religious consciousness of the time. Valuing art as something that simply confers pleasure through beauty follows the loss of faith in the upper classes in Catholicism and church Christianity. So he not only says what art should be, but he's saying that the way we judge art in a particular time is dependent on the religious consciousness of that time. And I think that's just a really interesting kind of intellectual historical idea. there's the reason we like, well, not the we, including Tolstoy, but society in general. The reason why Verlaine and Mallarmé are so popular is because of basically uh, an atheist
Yeah.
religious consciousness, which is interesting because obviously atheism is the denial of religion and of God, but that doesn't stop it from being a religious consciousness of its own sort, which is also a very modern idea. That atheism is its own religion, especially in the hands of Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens, but in society more broadly,
Yeah.
and that's why in the time Tolstoy's writing, we like or Mallarmé and Verlaine are popular, but we could also say it's why in the 20th and 21st century, people like what were called the young British artists, so Damien Hirst is popular. Why pop art was popular in the 60s, and why all these things are popular is because of the religious consciousness of the time, which is pretty empty, I think Tolstoy would say.